Okay, who knows what? We're you guys are in my sights.
Oh God forbid.
Is this working?
Now
Yeah,
I have
it is
to
working.
behave
Okay,
myself.
so we're just gonna forget about this. I'm gonna set this up. Oh, hello.
Is that where she is?
That's where she is.
Excuse me, but
Mind if I'll just move you over here as long as you want that chair. I'll take the next.
Jen always says, "Where's the cat?" And I say, "Look around. There she is. What's going on here?"
By the way, I told when we were out at your place, I was looking at the chairs, the brewer chairs that you guys have there.
Yeah.
We saw a couple that were in somewhat state of disarray. So I told Marion, like, I think we have a few of those things just sitting around in the basement. I don't know if you guys would want them. And she said, "Oh, definitely." So we turned her loose on some chair repairs because when you're an ophthalmologist, you need to have some other skill to fall back on, I guess.
She can do almost anything. It's very discouraging.
That mine?
Yeah.
Beautiful. All right. I can't tell you how happy I am to be here and how amazed I am to be here.
Tell me about it. I always said that he would outlive me, and everybody laughed. It isn't a fantasy.
Okay.
On the side? No?
That cat loves that.
She left?
Loves.
Oh, she loves to play with that toy.
Okay. Boy, we are almost in business. Let's see. Testing 1, 2, 3. Are we recording? Yeah, it looks like we are. Oh, how perfect is that, huh?
I like the tone.
Okay, so let me tell you what we're going to do. I told you a little bit about it, Gerry.
Do we need more light?
I don't think so.
Do you need more light?
Actually, you're coming through. You guys look nice.
Fine.
There. It looks fine. As long as we don't get an earthquake that causes that all to fall backwards, we're in good shape. And I'm in I'm in the area of my home that doesn't get earthquakes. The California side is the other side of the world.
You better believe it.
So I've been, for the last 3 years, I've been doing some training in an organization called Heritage Heritage Institute Foundation is that awful group that Carl Rove, one of your friends, runs.
Have you been keeping up with him?
No.
Well, I want you to know that he is president of the university, which is, I think, Baptist or something. And they have a major scandal with football players and female students. And he has ignored it nonstop and has finally been made to be president emeritus.
Oh, did not catch any of that. I was too busy cringing every time the Republican standard bearer opens his mouth.
What do you do, Steve? What do you do?
Pray for divine inspiration. There's nothing else that seems more worthless than that. So anyway, let me come back to this.
I think that this is the cruelest joke on the Republican world.
Things don't look good, but they don't look good in a lot of ways. And yet, over your lifetime, you've sure lived with a lot worse. And so my sense is we'll get through it. And
I hope you're right.
If we don't, what are our choices?
There are things about him that are really frightening, and it's the support that he has that makes it more frightening.
It's pretty weird. Can't wait to go visit my folks and listen to my dad tell me how great he thinks he is. So that'll be fun. So anyway, for about 3 years, I've been in this. I've been getting trained in. I don't know. It's a group that focuses on for starters, it starts with this premise that says when you manage to build up some wealth in your life, that about 70% of the time it's gone before your kids are gone. And that over 3 generations, it's almost always gone. Less than 10% of the time it lasts. And when they start looking at kind of what do the successful families do that sets them apart, it came down to an awful lot of they share their stories. They share their sense of who they are and what made them who they are and what they stand for. And so I've been anxious to try this out. And so Marion and Jack were really the first people I'd done it with. And you know, I sense there's really something special. I'd actually tried it out with my own parents, and some of the stories there were really pretty amazing. I tried it out with some friends, just some of these conversations, and similarly, you know, I've thought for a long time that the idea of capturing something that you know, kind of gets to the guts of who you guys are could be invaluable for your kids and your grandkids and their grandkids. When I talked to Marion and I said, you know, how important would it be for your grandchildren to know some of what we're talking about? She says, well, you know, except for what my dad's told me about his parents, I don't know anything. I certainly don't know anything about my great-grandparents. And maybe it would be pretty cool for our grandkids or great-grandkids or their great-grandkids to know something about where we're from. So that's sort of the background. I want you to feel free to add anything. If I strike a chord and you just want to talk about something that reminded you of, please do. I've set aside a couple of hours. If I tire you out long before that, that's fine. But that's where I'm coming from. So for starters, I've got a bit of I've prepared a bunch of questions that we'll draw from. And it's got a little bit of a rhythm to it, but like I said, don't feel challenged to add anything you want or go in a different direction. I wanted to start with kind of just talking about the home you grew up in and your family life when you were growing up. John, can you describe something about the home you grew up in? I know a little bit about your history and a little bit about, you know, kind of the craziness when the war came upon you, but yeah, just talk about the home you grew up in and your family.
I never grew up.
You never grew up?
John, come on.
You know, you come on. You do. You are. I want you uncensored. So.
Anyhow, go ahead.
So I want to hear about the home that you grew up in, the house itself, your family.
Well, if you consider growing up prior to, say, 20, I can give you some answers, but only till, well, really, a break of date would be when I was 18.
Okay.
Then we were occupied by the Germans.
Uh-huh.
Till then, I led the life of all upper middle class Jewish boys in Hungary.
Okay.
Who had
You're kitty.
he says in cat language that go ahead, finish it.
He's wanting to answer your questions for you.
Continue your story.
And that middle class good existence suddenly broke off when the Germans occupied us, when we were considered really slaves as against independently thinking and acting citizens.
So that would have been about 1944, or when was that?
Yeah, I think
A little earlier.
No, in fact, 45.
Okay. Okay. So what would your life have looked like when you were prior to their occupation?
Good. Life was good. My grandmother, we had a double existence. My grandmother had a booming business in the country which needed help, and once a week my mother went there to help out. But otherwise, my father was the chief accountant for a liquor company, which he gave up because the textile store, which my grandmother owned, did so well that she said, remember quite well, she said to him that why not pay you the same amount I piss out to accountants, and you run the accounting, you hire them, and that's what happened. My father took over the accounting part. Accounting part of what? My grandmother had a wholesale, not wholesale, I would say it's a retail arrangement, textile business, which was between two cities. We lived in Budapest, my mother and us, and then after a year or so, the entire family moved to Budapest. So it was, we were together. We did very well. Textile and fashion items in a country seat of, I don't know, maybe the population of that town was 25 to 50,000. The heart of Hungary's textile industry. So business was good, money was good, and after a while my parents decided that for my father to stay in, once a week my mother had to come down to this town we were in, because the business was so fantastic. My grandmother needed help, and they didn't trust anybody strange except her daughter. So that's to show you how he plays ball.
Playing with a toy mouse or something.
Anyhow, when my father gave up the shop in Budapest and moved on to the town where my grandma lived, which was for you unpronounceable name of Turks at Miklos.
Okay, beautiful. I would have thought that was the name.
And, but my mother, interestingly enough, said, we are going down to that mud slinging dirt hole that she used to call my grandmother's town. We are not giving up the capital, Budapest, but we'll have this arrangement. So once a week, my mother went down to the Turks and Miklos, the market, and help out on the market and the bookkeeping, the connection with that. And that was usually Wednesday, the big market day, and then Saturday, either she went back again, or it was a traveling business, constant. But the money was flowing in, was doing very well. Life was comfortable. We had a one-story country house, and actually life was good till I was what, and then 8, 10. At that point, my grandmother became crazy, fell in love with a younger man, obviously, and younger, and let him move in. This was a one-story country house. And you know, he moved in. But the happiness didn't last too long, because turns out to be that when he came home, he brought a visit, carnation to my grandmother, or a rose here from his pal. But once he was about a block or two away, his eyes opened and he started to pick up girls. And it's the old story, you know. And
so how long did he stick around?
he stuck around for about a year.
Okay.
At which point he would have stuck around 10. My grandmother kicked him out. My grandmother said, I don't need somebody who, for my money and my food, goes and fucks around the town.
Beautiful. So did you have siblings?
What?
Did you have siblings, brothers, sisters?
No.
Okay. So what did you do at that point in your age? So from the first 15 or 18 years that you were alive, what were the kinds of things that you did for fun, school, etc.?
Well, the school year, I was in Budapest. We maintained a big apartment there. On school holidays, I went to my grandmother's town. Summer, I was there, except maybe 2-3 weeks. We rented a house along Lake Balaton, which is Hungary's gem, absolute gem of resorts. And life was good. I mean, the big battles between my grandma and his lover never really deeply affected me. I kind of liked him, the old man. You know, he used to come with a carnation here, and sometimes as a joke he put it in my pocket. And money he never had because my grandmother was a smart cookie, would not let him closer than a human reach to the cash register.
Mm.
So, anyhow,
She had her limits.
yeah.
How about you, Gerry? What was growing up like for you? What was the house you lived in like? What was it like growing up with your family?
And my family consisted of my older sister, who was 4 years older than I, and my mother and my dad. And my dad adored my mother. I'm not sure that she adored him in the same way. They met when she was 18 and he was, I think, 20, 21, just out of the Army, First World War, where he'd been a cook. And they got married, had Dorothy, then me. Dorothy, the classic story is Dorothy was not wildly enthusiastic about my arrival, and the family lore is that when she had a playmate who lived next door, was much more well-to-do than we were, and when he said that he couldn't play with her anymore because his mother said she was Jewish, Dorothy said, "I'm not Jewish. My baby sister's Jewish." So we lived in Chicago, in Hyde Park, where I grew up partly. When I was in 4th grade, we moved to Kansas City. My dad worked for the United Insurance Company, was made a manager of this Kansas City office. We moved to Kansas City, lived in an apartment, and then for the very first time lived in a rented house. And we were there and moved back when I was in 7th grade there, which is 8th grade here, complicated, but they only have 7 grades elementary, we had 8, blah, blah, blah. So we moved to the north side because my mother was not happy in Kansas City. She wanted to be with her family. Never quite figured out why, but that's all right. So they moved back because my uncles concocted this wonderful opportunity for my dad to open a liquor store. And my dad was probably the least likely person you could think to run a liquor store. He was afraid of being robbed, which he was. It was on the north side, near Argyle. It was a foreign country to him. It lasted a year before it went bankrupt.
Sweet.
Before that, when we were living in Kansas City, we would drive back to Chicago every year to visit. One year we're driving back, and my dad decided he would drive at night because that would save a whole day. So we were driving at night, drunken driver, head on. And my dad threw his arm across to keep my mother from going out the windshield, broke a couple of her ribs, but saved us all, well, saved her. I fell off the back seat onto the floor and hurt my knee, but the concern about my mom was, I don't think anybody ever noticed that I had a knee that was about this big. The year we spent on the north side, to me, was great. I was at Gowdy School. It was an unbelievable experience because here I am entering 8th grade, where everybody else has been together for the last 7 years. And they were so generous and inclusive that it was probably one of the best years that I can remember. It was just lovely. And one of my friend's father was a professional painter. That's the first time I ever heard of anybody painting pictures and supporting a family. And it was just a very charmed year. And then we moved to the south side because the liquor store went bankrupt. And my dad started for another insurance company. And I started at South Shore High School. And a cousin of ours introduced me to my friend Joan, who became my very close friend. It was an interesting household because Joan had a younger brother. Joan's father was a very prominent lawyer. He was the counsel for the AFL-CIO.
Oh, wow.
And they lived a very different style life than we did. But Dan was very fond of, the family divided. The mother loved the boy, Dan loved the Joan.
I'm sorry, excuse me.
And
Your grandson Dan, I didn't want to say,
Yeah.
I'll take a message. Sorry.
Daniel, how are you? I'm fine. What's up?
You know, he really helped.
Well, what can I say? You know, you didn't make an appointment, so, yeah. Can I call you back this afternoon? All right? All right? Thanks for calling. And hi to Ronnie. Bye.
Who was he?
That was your grandson, the assistant managing editor of Time Magazine. That's all. Anyhow, where was I?
You're talking about the split in the family. Dan liked
Dan liked Joan,
right, the daughter.
and the mother
Mom
liked.
liked the son.
I wonder if you know the son, Sherman Carmel. He is, I think, also in labor law. Anyhow, it was a very interesting family. Dan was indicted for the Mann Act. And the day that he was to appear in court, they lived at the Powhatan in Hyde Park, and he went out the 14th-story window.
Ooh. Wow.
By that time, Joan married a young psychiatrist in training, and they had 3 little kids in a house in Hyde Park that John did the remodeling of the kitchen, and just as the kitchen was finished and the baby was 6 months old, Joan's husband came home, didn't feel good, and died. She remarried a professor at the University of Chicago in Romantic languages. She and her first husband bought a shack in a small town in Colorado, Aspen, and after he died, she continued going up there. And one summer, they went to a concert. At intermission, she was there with the 3 kids, leaned against a tree, and said, "I've been shot," and died.
Holy smokes.
Kid was target practicing, went off target, stray bullet hit her and killed her.
Wow. So this was one of your best friends from what, high school on, or?
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was such a bizarre family. Anyhow, so we moved to the South Side. I went to South Shore. My family was, before dysfunctional was politically correct. My mother's family was dysfunctional. My mother had a sister and 3 brothers. The sister never had children, lived in Hammond, married to a guy who was a complete and total scumbag. My sister and I...
Uncle Scumbag.
My sister and I, before it became popular, learned to stay away from him. And whatever you do, don't let him make you sit on his lap.
Wow.
That was Albert. Meanwhile, my youngest uncle married a woman above him. She came from a very wealthy family in St. Louis. And they adopted a daughter who is still a good friend of ours. And the family was, to say dysfunctional is, my mother's family is to be very complimentary. My grandmother lived with us.
Dysfunctional, and I mean that only in the good way.
My grandmother lived with us. My grandmother had cataracts, and in those days, wasn't the same surgery, and she became blind.
Mm-hmm.
She hated my father. My mother was in the middle. My sister hated my grandmother. And for some reason, I don't know why, I became the peacemaker. And so I would play cards with my grandmother and kibitz with her and spend time with her, because she hated when my mother would go out. So I would be the good kid.
So was she blind at this point, or?
She was blind. And she was not a happy camper. My mother's family was, to be kind, they were poor. My grandfather died when I was 7. He was a house painter. And he was also, I think, an alcoholic, so that by the time he got paid and came home, he didn't have very much left of his paycheck. And by that time, my grandmother had 5 kids, and he died. So they had a very scrabble life.
Mm.
My mom went to work when she was, I think, 12 or 14, dropped out of school, and the boys had no interest in helping out with my grandmother, so she became my mother and dad's responsibility. And
no good deed goes unpunished.
You got it. And I remember the last time she was hospitalized, and the question was, how were they going to pay the bills? And my mom got everybody at the house to discuss the problems. My aunts were poisonous, and their feeling was not a penny of our money, and the boys went along with it. And my mother said, she's going to be discharged from the hospital, we have to pay the hospital bill. And the boys said, don't look at me. They all could have helped, but these are the things that I remember. They were.
So are there lessons from that particular thing that you feel like are part of who you are?
Yeah, because I was always the peacemaker and always the one. I mean, my sister disliked my grandmother. I saw it as a problem for my mother, so that if I could keep my grandmother amused and off my mother's back,
Mm-hmm.
I was doing that for her.
Mm-hmm.
There was, not that I'm trying to paint myself as a martyr, but it was fascinating family dynamics. One of my uncle's wife, the wife of one of my uncles, they had no children. She was a character and a half, and she had a brother who was a motorcycle policeman and had been killed in action. And we were over there one day, and my mother was furious about the fact that the family was just turning a deaf ear to the whole problem with my grandmother. And I remember that she picked up a picture of Bobby's brother and threw it against the wall, and it broke. And then my mother just lost it and said to me, would you tell her you did it?
Good boy. Take the hit.
And I said, sure. So Bobby was very angry at me, and my feeling was, so what?
What were like some of your happiest childhood memories?
I really liked living in Kansas City. Kansas City was a very idyllic kind of place, and coming back in 8th grade was just great. And I liked high school. I mean, South Shore was an interesting school. It had just opened. South Shore at that time was a very Protestant Catholic community. It had the largest diocese in the city, St. Philip Neri, and they had a school, and a large church. And when the first African American family moved in, it was a major controversy. Could the kids go to the parochial school? And one of our best friends was a very liberal Catholic and insisted that they be able to go to school. And they had a cross burned on their lawn. South Shore, as a high school, was new, and the principal was an absolute bitch. After South Shore, I went to Wilson Junior College, where I had a math teacher. I was the only girl in the calculus class, and I had a math teacher who absolutely took me on as a case and insisted that I not go to Illinois, where I had my heart set on because I could move away from home, but go to the U of C. And his feeling was, oh, you grow up, you tell people you went to the U of C, to U of I, and nobody cares. You tell them you went to the U of C, they're impressed. So he turns up one day with a booklet of all of the scholarships available at the U of C because we couldn't afford it. And sure enough, there was a scholarship for the children of veterans of World War I. My father, the cook. So I went to the U of C on scholarship because my father was a cook in the First World War.
Wow. That sounds very cool. I have to tell you, Marion had a story or two about St. Philip Neri and going in there to see if, they would set off alarms because they were Jewish, in their marauding days. John, how about you? What, when you think of kind of childhood memories, what sticks out as great childhood memories or, distinctive childhood memories?
My most distinctive childhood memories were some Sunday afternoons when I went with my father to the soccer game. Family gatherings. My father's brother's, Steve's house, usually Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening. Food was good, conversation was good, dirty jokes were whispered, but I could hear it.
Setting in line a long history to be followed.
Right.
Okay. So, you lived through, on the ground, a massive sea change as kind of the world changed around you as you were in your later teens. So what was that like? What did you see? How did it change you?
Well, the change took place while I was gone. I was taken into labor camp, and I spent practically 1 year in camp, various locations, with various groups, building various things. Among them, railroad lines. God knows, we built every fucking thing in the world. toward the end, and it was not a bad position, because in comparison to the other Jews, older, who were taken into labor camp, I was not in a camp. Sure, we lived in barracks, but the food was good. We cooked our own food. I mean, it was like a Boy Scout outing.
And you were what, 18 then?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So how did that end? I mean, did that end when the war was over, or?
Yeah. It ended when we were in a camp. This was a labor camp, about 200 youngsters, and it ended as quietly as it started with the noise. I would say one day our guards, our guardians, whatever you want to call them, SS and various, they disappeared.
Wow.
Nowhere. But luckily it was all a question of luck. I remember the last day or two before the Germans disappeared, one of them said, gave me a shovel to dig a hole like the size of half a table. It was this deep, into which they could put in these boxes of bones, which was left from the feeding of the hunting dogs that they had. I mean, ridiculous job. And they gave me the shovel to dig the hole. The hole was supposed to be this deep. It's nothing. I could not move the dirt. I was so weak by this time from malnutrition and working much more acceptable work than this fucking digging holes. I couldn't. And the guy took my shovel out of my hand, the SS, and started to hit me with it. And I fell on my ass. And I overheard as the two SS men were talking. One says, "Why don't you just shoot him like a dog?" And the guy answered, it would be a waste of ammunition. And that's the way they walked away. That's the way the war was over for me. The started to hit me with a shovel. I collapsed, fell on my ass, on my face. I heard them talk, they walked away.
And the next day they were gone?
Next morning, they were disappeared. They were gone.
So when that happened, did other troops come in and liberate the camp, or did you guys just realize they were gone and you could walk away, or what?
No, there were no other troops left.
Mm-hmm.
The soldiers were gone. Whoever organized this ordered a regiment of Austrian firemen to come out and guard us, like we had no connection with the fire battalions, but when the few soldiers who were left disappeared also, we were maybe in the camp at that time 2,000 left. Altogether, in this camp, population was maybe 25,000 workers. Most of us were so weakened physically that we were good for nothing. I mean, I couldn't hold a shovel to dig a hole this deep, maybe the size of half of the.
So how did you actually get out of the camp? Did you just walk out? Did people eventually come up and start to feed you or care for you and process you out somehow, or what?
Everybody, like Americans sent advance troops with loudspeakers. Please do not eat anything till we feed you. It's dangerous, and dangerous, my ass. Nobody believed it. We were hungry, and when you are starved, and a lot of the people, about, I don't remember numbers now anymore, a lot of them were lying down on the ground. This was in a clearing of a forest, dead or dying from malnutrition, suddenly overeating. The barracks were all broken in, food, canned goods, everything open, stolen. It was the world's largest mix up, you can imagine. And they said, trust us, we are bringing you good food. Trust my ass. Nobody trusted them. They were these weird Americans who smoked this wonderful camels and Lucky Strikes. Gave us one. We were throwing up from
Nirvana.
Anyhow, and this chaos lasted one day because, as they promised, Americans were very reluctant to promise and not to keep. That I have tremendous respect for. Sure enough, next day this funny little device came, which turned out to be a military oven or whatever for cooking things. And they said, 10 o'clock in the morning you can start cooking. Because by that time, we were down to maybe 2,000 in the camp. Start cooking my ass. We were already cooking. Half of us were sick from overeating. After starving for weeks, suddenly having this rich.
Gorging yourself.
What?
Gorging.
Oh, absolutely.
While you were at camp, did you have friends there? Or was it everybody kind of for themselves, or what?
both kind of situation. Of the camp, the last camp, there were maybe 300, 400 people. Then the other smaller group, a few thousand here, there. I forgot any now. I never remembered actually the number. Maybe there was about 2,000 to 5,000 people in my last camp, survivors. They were all young people. And we managed on what we stole from the camp warehouses, built big fires, started to cook, started to be sick. A friend of mine died practically in front of my eyes. You know, when you have a year of wet starvation diet, suddenly this chaotic situation lasted maybe a week or two. And then after it, Americans arrived, the real Americans, you know, who had food and decent clothing and gave up Chesterfield's Lucky Strike and after they arrived and they fed us doctors and nurses came, they examined us. Some of us were hospitalized, like me. I was put in a army hospital, which I remember.
Nothing.
I remember that they are putting me in the hospital, but the hospital where what turned out to be later I found out this was an army hospital, temporary, like barracks, but it saved our lives. There was no question about it. What we ate, how we were fed, with what? This hospital period of 10 days, or maybe 2 weeks, I have no recollection. Human mind is weird.
Came out the other side, that's all you know for sure? So Gerry, let me switch gears back to you. First of all, I see you made a couple of notes. Are there some things you wanted to mention or no?
Well, one of the things that John didn't talk about is going from Hungary to Austria in the winter through the Alps and losing his father. And just that he had typhus and they were liberated by Patton's army. And it's the same old story when the Americans liberated them. Most of the soldiers were in tears.
And so the going from Hungary to Austria, that was when? Was that after you got out of the camp, or was that when you were a child, or when was that?
Hungary as a country didn't exist. Nothing existed in the mix-up right after the shooting. The Austria re-established itself. Hungary all of these smaller countries re-established themselves. And stores opened, food was available suddenly.
John,
Yeah,
what I was referring to was that you were in a work camp in Hungary
yeah,
with your father. And then you guys were marched in November
yeah,
from Hungary to the camp in Austria.
right,
And it was on that march that your father was killed.
right.
And how did that happen?
Well, I wasn't there,
Okay.
but I know that about after the last groups, we are talking about a group of laborers, maybe a couple thousand more, I can't tell you the number. After there were a number of the ones who just dragged themselves, they couldn't walk.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't walk. That's one of them was my father. These were, we are talking about 20 to 30 so-called draggers. And after the war, we drove down to that part of Austria. I wanted to see where he was buried. It is probably the most poetically beautiful part of the Austrian Alps. Lake, mountains around. I mean, it's sickeningly beautiful. Now it's a resort. At that time, before the war, I don't know what it was, but my father is buried there, together maybe another 20 people.
When you think of your father, you know, if you think of your father and describing him in terms of a couple of 2 or 3 words, what would you use to describe him?
2 or 3 words?
Yeah. Like that just speak to his essence of who he is in your mind.
There is no way I can do it in 2 or 3 words.
Okay, then use the number that you want.
Okay. You're staying for dinner.
I see you have good command of other jokes, not just the dirty ones.
Right. Well, you know, the Austro-Hungarian border, which was loaded with slave laborers working on fortifications which were totally useless against American tanks. Nevertheless, it kept the German army occupied, and they
What were you working on when he was hurt?
what?
What were you working on when he was hurt?
When my father was hurt,
Yeah.
we were not. He was not working anymore. The 20 or 30 people who
Draggers.
couldn't hold the shovel anymore. Were put on a truck the German army truck to take away, they said, to do some labor. We believed it like I believe that your shirt is red. It was clearly not believable. It was the worst struggle, my inner struggle in my life. I knew that if I go with him, that's the end. He was already, the limb is, practically couldn't see. And he was dragged to this truck where they put 20 people. They are all buried in the Austrian Alps. He went there to visit.
Oh.
Where is it? Remember, Gerry, when we went there?
I want to think it's near Salzburg, but I'm not sure.
Anyhow, these are all the dragons who couldn't make it. Nice time of my life.
I don't hear those stories very often.
No.
What about you, Gerry? When your dad died when? Or was he part of your life? Or I don't, kind of talk about your mom mostly, but.
It's interesting. My dad was a very silent, quiet, he was very fond of my mother, and it was, after she died, he really, I think we came to appreciate him.
Oh.
My mom died at 62 with breast cancer, and they had planned on moving to Hallandale in Florida and bought an apartment that they had rented, and so she had furnished it, and after she died, he sold their house and moved to Florida, and really became much more of a presence. The kids went down one spring break. Pam, I don't know if all three of them went, but I know the younger two went and stayed with him for a week. He was great. Took them to the Everglades, took them to visit all kinds of places he could think of for them, and they had a marvelous time. And my dad would come home every year and visit for a while and then go back. He had emphysema, so the winters were really bad for him. But at one point, he had a TIA, you know what that is. And his friend in the building called and said, I took your dad to the hospital. So my sister and I got on a plane, flew down, and when he was ready to be discharged, we brought him back to Chicago. And then a question became, would he stay here or go back to Florida? We were worried that if he went back, he was alone. He said, I can be just fine alone, but if you girls are too worried, I'll stay here. And we went through the whole process that Council for Jewish Elderly, because we wanted him to live in a facility where there was support.
Mhm.
And at the end of this discussion, meeting, the social worker meeting with him, meeting with us and everything, we all got together and she said, you know, your dad is perfectly happy to stay in this area, and because he knows that you girls want it. Now your dad is 82, 84, whatever, and has made his own decisions all of his life. My dad came here when he was 14 and made his way always on his own. She said, he'll do whatever you want. Do you want to make that decision for him? He went back to Florida. And one day we got a call that he had picked up his newspaper at 8:30 because his next door neighbor checked, and his friend, my aunt, and he exchanged phone calls at 9, and he didn't answer his phone.
Mhm.
And if my dad had written the script, that's what
That's
we
a
wrote.
pretty good script. That sounds like a pretty good script.
Yeah.
So when you think about your mom and your dad, can you think of a characteristic or two of each of them that you feel like, you know, that's a part of you, or that makes sense?
My mother was a very subservient person in many ways, and I think that I kind of deliberately do the opposite, because her family walked all over her and she let them, and I wanted to hit them upside the head.
Okay.
And my feeling was, this is wrong. And my dad was a very quiet presence, and it wasn't until after my mom died that he really became a person and was a remarkable individual. Literally, he came here from Lithuania when he was 14 on his own. He had cousins who, quote, took him under their wing, but really used him. And my father started when he was a little older. He saved money, bought a horse and a cart, and became a junk man. And then he was drafted, and when he came back, his business was bankrupt. But their business, which was the same business, was thriving.
With friends like those.
Family like that.
I got you.
Anyhow, and my dad was just a very quiet presence.
That's a great line. Quiet presence. That really is a rich description.
Yeah. And I told you that I went to school on a scholarship. After he died, in his wallet, we found the letter that the university sent saying that I was accepted on Vernoy's scholarship.
That's pretty cool.
So I think that kind of describes him pretty accurately. And I was delighted, not that my mother died, but that we had the opportunity to really get to know him better and
Flourishing.
treasure him. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. So John, about your mom and your dad, when you think of kind of what really stood out about their character, or the, you know, the kind of the measure of those people, how do you answer that? Does that question make sense?
Hmm?
Does the question make sense?
How would you describe your mom and your dad?
Like, kind of what's the essence of each of them?
Well, you know, my dad I hardly knew. I was 18 or so when we were separated, and much of my youth, early marriage was in a life which was very little controlled by me. As far as my
John, they're working on the building.
that's right. I forgot. I thought the Germans are back.
They're trying to drill their way in.
Anyhow,
Your mother?
hmm?
Your mom?
mother.
Your mother?
Yeah, my mother was a remarkably strong woman who nothing fazed her. She, whether it was fighting the Russian troops which came in occupying after the Germans were kicked out, or making deals with the farmers for food, nothing fazed my mom. She was a remarkable woman.
So when you say nothing fazed her, do you mean she was really level-headed, or she was always determined, or what when you say nothing fazed her, she just was always a calm, even personality?
Not an even personality, but always found a solution.
Okay.
Always found a solution. Whether the solution was fighting the Germans, which was totally hopeless, or making deals with the peasants in this neighborhood for feeding for family while they were hiding there. All of, and believe me, the period which I kind of, went like this. If I go like this, and include the description of every one of the events, we will be here till midnight.
Mm-hmm.
No, that unfortunately, or fortunately, we cannot do. My youth was not a joyous, constantly happy event. After I was liberated and brought back and
Did you see your mom again after you were liberated?
what?
Did you see your mother again after you were liberated?
Sure.
So did you go? You went back to live with her for a while?
Yeah. I went back after I was liberated. My mother insisted that I go in a small town where she lived, fed me like this. And I was liberated when in March, February, whenever, somewhere there. By the time the fall came around, September, October, I was already enrolled at the university.
At the university where?
University of Budapest. And, the tuition you paid was directly proportional to your grades. That was a wonderful system.
So if you got an F, you didn't have to pay much, or other way around? You got an A, you paid little?
That's right.
Okay. So how did you go from University at Budapest to Miami?
Oh, that's another story.
I imagine so.
Excuse me, but can I add a little bit about
Yeah.
Margaret?
Yep.
Margaret was, as John said, Margaret was a great problem solver. She found a family that she had gone to school with the woman, the daughter, and she contacted them and they hid her during the war. But she insisted, John had been in a labor camp and got out, escaped, and went home. And she insisted that he go back to be with his father in the camp that he was with his father. And after the war, when the opportunity, which John will talk about, coming to the States, this is someone who was very, very, very involved. John was an only child, and she was really the light of his life, her life. Yet, when the opportunity came for him to go to the States, she insisted that he go, realizing full well that she may never see him again. So she was a very interesting contradiction, very self-involved, very self-involved. From my view, a little manipulative, because she did a great deal of criticizing of Ferry, the father, to John. And I'm not going into that, but she also, for someone who was so dependent on her one child, insisted that when he had the opportunity to go. And when finally she had an opportunity to get out of Hungary at great cost to us, she came here, moved here with all of her worldly possessions, and 2 weeks later decided she didn't like it here and she was going back. And she did. But here's a perfect example of Margaret. My sister's husband was born in Poland, and his family, both mother and father, were dentists, very upper class. He came here when he was, I think, 12, and his parents were very, very patriarchal. So John picks up his mother at the airport in New York. He spent a couple of days in New York. I picked them up, and my lovely sister had arranged for a family dinner because the Gann seniors were here. So John and my mother-in-law come with us to this dinner, at which point I have no idea how the topic came up. But my mother-in-law starts waxing eloquently about how bad the Polacks are. And you can tell they're so stupid because they have very high foreheads. And John is translating from Hungarian to English. And I'm kicking him under the table.
Not so literal.
And he says, "What are you kicking me for?"
I knew we have something in common because I say that to my wife all the time. Why are you kicking me?
That was such a famous dinner. Oh my God. Anyhow, that's a little insight into Margaret.
It's a little color commentary.
And John wanted her to cook his favorite meals, and she would. We lived in South Shore at the time. We lived half a block from the Yevel, where she went shopping, the Jewel.
Okay.
And she would cook the meal. I would cook for the rest of the family, and John would eat it dutifully. And finally, after 2 or 3 of these, he said, "You know, Mom, I don't know. It just isn't the way I remember it." And she says to him, "Dummy, I worked. Francie cooked."
Okay, so let me switch back to getting from Budapest to Miami.
How did you get out of Hungary, John?
The Americans, after they liberated the various camps, allowed anybody to go anywhere they wanted to. And I took the train to Budapest, which was already a tremendous adventure because the trains were run by the Russians, the Russian army. Don't ask me why. Because the Austrians occupied here, the Austria was occupied by, the Austrians. This area was occupied by the Americans. Then Hungary was there, the trains go this way. When the trains reach the border between the 2 occupations, my first meeting with the Russians, had my package, which we got up. When the Americans released us from camp, they gave us a navy blue suit, some white shirts, couple shirts, decent shoes, everything. and we put them in a bag on the luggage part.
Mhm.
When the train reached the occupation zones between the Russian occupation and the American occupation, as soon as the Americans said, no,
The Russians?
we got to the borderline, and the I was right at the beginning. Americans said, get out, get out, get out of the train. And so I reached for my package. And don't worry, it will be when we arrive in Budapest.
Yeah.
How the Russian army stole my package.
If I were you, I would demand that they send it back now.
We could start a lawsuit.
You probably still fit in that suit too. Okay, so that's when you were going to Budapest after you got released.
Right.
So bring us up to going from Budapest to Oxford, Ohio. How did that happen?
I was looking for the B'nai B'rith, which is a Jewish organization, was supposed to pay for my college education.
Okay.
By the time I fucked around with the
I want to see if this is still working. Oh, good. Okay.
by the time was wasted, all colleges all were filled.
John, you're skipping over something.
Yeah.
It was the Hillel Foundation, right?
Yeah.
That was recently established. And they had a program of, quote, rescuing the youth of Europe that had been so affected by the war.
Yeah.
And so it was under the Hillel program that you applied.
Yeah.
To come to the States?
To come to the States, to university. And you ended up at Oxford, at whatever, because it was right after the war, and the GI Bill was filling the universities.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I was supposed to go to, at that time, most available university in the world of the United States. And they asked me to fill in my request. And I'm reading my, what about this page? And it's, I'm supposed to fill out a questionnaire, and one of the answers was being a leftist or a rightist.
No, it was your religion.
You're right. My religion. Well, anybody asking my religion can go fuck themselves. That's the way I felt. That's none of their business. Religion is a private. Yeah.
So he didn't go to, I think, USC he ended up at Miami of Ohio.
Okay.
That's it.
That's it. How did you two meet?
I was rooming with a friend of mine, Bob Diamond, and he had a girlfriend, Charlotte, and one day, what's the
Charlotte got the idea that she and Bob should go to the KAM lecture series, and that you should go. And Charlotte was a club sister of mine. The University of Chicago did not have sororities. They had women's clubs. But Charlotte was a friend of mine, and she called me up without saying anything about the hidden agenda, and said, how would you like to go to this lecture series? Now this lecture series was a really nothing. The speakers were William Douglas, who was, I think, the Chief Justice at that point, Eleanor Roosevelt,
Another slouch.
and a few other of those low-level individuals. So I said, sure. And when I went to pick her up, there's this schlemiel in a body cast because he's just been hit by a car.
I like the facial. I like the full effect there.
And my family just felt so bad because here is this poor schlemiel who doesn't have any family, and he's in a body cast, poor thing.
So did you go to the lecture
Yeah,
in the body cast?
yeah.
He was.
You do know how to make
an impression.
Yeah,
A solid impression.
very solid. So, so what was it about John that you found attractive, other than, you know, you'd never dated a guy in a body cast before?
With a Hungarian accent.
That accent's been slaying them for years.
I don't know what attracted me. How did I get into this?
Come on, Gerry.
He was funny. He was talented. One of the things my lovely husband did was at some point when we moved, he burned all of his drawings that he had made when he was in university that were unbelievable. I couldn't believe it. Anyhow, but you know, he was certainly different, and very, I mean, the second time we went out, he brought me roses.
What, did he tuck him in the body cast, or
No.
sticking out of his
Right,
neck?
right. And of course, he was going to have tons of money from this accident, okay? He had somebody taking care of him who worked hand in glove with a lawyer, and man, this was worth a fortune. So when it finally settled, we had enough to buy a turntable.
Sweet. So wait a second, when you said he burned the drawings,
You know, he was
Was that intentional, or you didn't like
Oh,
them?
yeah, no, we were moving from one apartment to another, and these take up a lot of room and stuff, and when I came home, what? Anyhow, he was charming, he was different, that's for sure, and, he was just adorable.
So John, how about you? What about Gerry? What would you say really stood out about Gerry?
What?
What really stood out about Gerry when you first met her? What made you think?
Think carefully about this answer,
It-
Jane.
Intelligence. What?
She's threatening you over here. She's threatening you. Your hearing is obviously not that.
No,
Helpful.
I was impressed, immensely impressed by her intelligence, I liked her looks, and I was lonely.
Any port in a storm.
What?
I said any port in a storm.
Yeah. What else can I tell you?
So I'll tell you what you can tell me is how, when you think about Gerry as a mother, as a parent.
I can't think of her as a father.
Thank you. It's good to see the act is starting to warm up. As a parent, what about Gerry's parenting, was noteworthy, or how would you describe her parenting?
Her parenting,
Yeah.
I absolutely admired. Absolutely admired. To this day, I think she was a great parent, a great educator to her kids, and actually a great wife to me. What else can I say?
How about you, Gerry? When you think about John and the role he played in raising your kids,
When John was with the kids, he could be absolutely great. But he had very little understanding of how kids grow up. I mean, he was an only child, didn't have any siblings, etc. And his expectation was not always reasonable. I mean, and I think in a way he was not afraid of, but very hesitant, especially when the kids were very young. John adores babies as long as they're quiet and sleeping and don't make a fuss. And as the kids got older, I think John retreated a lot. He would come home from work, change his clothes, have dinner, and kind of hide in his workroom. And a lot of the times when we were very young, he was doing perspectives, paintings of buildings for other architects to make more money. Partially because we were in debt up to the neck. His mother, we bought a house, okay. This goes back before you were born, dear heart. Our first house was $16,000. It was a 3-bedroom bungalow in South Shore. We borrowed money from my parents and bought the house. And 6 months later, I think, my mother-in-law said that her life was in danger and she could get out of Hungary if we paid $5,000 into a bank account. And John had a private client at that point who had a wife who was a lovely woman but could not make up her mind. So this small remodeling project for his house went on and on and on. And at the end of it, we were good friends. And he, in a throwaway comment, said, you know, I know when I bought my first house, I couldn't afford groceries. So if you ever need any money, come to me. And so when she wanted $5,000, John called him and said, can you help me? And the guy said, stop at the office tomorrow, I'll have a check. And so that was that. As the kids got older, John was much more involved with them. And he did things like take Aaron camping, although you cannot imagine a less interested camper in your life, but he did it. And he really enjoyed the kids. When they got older, it was more of a problem. He didn't have a lot of patience for them, and he didn't really understand child development. I mean, he couldn't understand why they couldn't do X, Y, or Z. You know, they'd be 5 or 6 years old, but he always loved the kids. Just didn't know very much about being a father.
So, I know Marion talks about, I don't know if it was going to the library or bookstores with you, but there was, one of the things she mentioned to me somewhere along the way was, you know, spending time with you, and books seemed to be tied into that. Was that maybe at the office or one-on-one things with Marion? No?
No.
Any particular interactions that you had with your kids that, you know, I mean, they seem like they were all pretty different as you were raising them. Anything in particular in terms of your interactions with them that were kind of your hallmark, or?
No.
Okay.
No.
When you think about your 4 kids, what comes to mind with Pam in terms of just a couple of traits that you look at and you really admire?
Growing up, I think it was hard for her because she was the first displaced kid. I mean, you know, here she's 2 years old and this monster comes into the house. But I think Pam always had an ability to adjust to situations. And after she got over the fact that what the hell is he doing here about Aaron, she did decide, okay, he can stay and maybe I can play with him, you know. Aaron, I think, had a scratch your head attitude about, what am I doing with all of these females? And Dad is not a traditional Dad in the going fishing and going hiking and sitting in, I mean, he would do building stuff with Aaron, but not a lot of the fireside chats. Marion was always the middle child, and you won't tell her this. The classic, I think, what captures Marion's attitude toward being the squeezed kid in the middle was she always competed academically. I mean, she drove herself.
Mhm.
And at one point, she came home, of course, with all A's. And we oohed and ahed, and oh my God, this is phenomenal, and look at the courses you're taking, and you got all A's and everything. And she burst into tears and said, well, you can't hang a report card on the wall. I mean, Pam was the artist,
Mhm.
Aaron was the artist, and here is Marion, who, interestingly enough, is an excellent photographer. But that was, she's always driven herself,
Mm-hmm.
no question about it.
No question about it. How about Gwen? What stands out kind of as you look back at Gwen?
When Gwen was 2 years old, the classic was, you would say, Gwen, who loves you? And she would say, everybody loves me. Unfortunately, that was kind of the high point for her, because Gwen, Gwen had a really hard time finding herself. She loved high school. High school, she had the best friends. She had the greatest social life you can imagine. She just beamed. College was really hard. She was involved with a guy that was not a good person, very manipulative, and she had, quote, a best friend who would always had a stiletto for her back. And she was young. She was always a year ahead of herself. And finally, when she was a sophomore, I said, how about just taking time off? You get 4 years of college. Things are not going well. Why not time off? And so she did. She took a year off. She worked as a waitress. She considered going into theater. She auditioned all over the place, got into Northwestern on the condition that she start over, and went to the O'Neill School for 6 months, and came home and said, it's not for me. Why? You have to be very competitive, and I'm not. You have to really be driven, and I'm not. So she went back and went to Illinois because she thought that she would need to go to graduate school, and it was cheapest. And while she was there, she volunteered at a radio station and was a DJ and loved it. It's a community radio station and really enjoyed it. So when she came home in her senior year, I think, she went down to BEZ and applied as an intern. And they said, well, fine, bring in a demo tape. And so they said, you can make a demo tape, right? She said, of course. So she goes back to Illinois, goes to the radio station and says, what's a demo tape? The guy helped her, said, you've got to get a guy to interview, somebody to interview. Well, William Warfield was the baritone who had just won a music award, and he was spending a semester as an artist in residence. So she made an appointment, and he very reluctantly agreed to an interview. So she interviewed him, comes home, calls me up, hysterical. What happened? I forgot to turn on the tape. I said, well, you have a choice. There is a Japanese dancer who is also an artist in residence, and you can interview him, or you can throw yourself on William Warfield's mercy and tell him what you did and ask him to re-interview. She figured that the Japanese guy accent was so strong, so she gathers all of her courage and confesses to Warfield what she did. He is not very gentle and very reluctantly agrees to re-interview. So she shows up and he doesn't. And she is devastated. And she's leaving, and there's a chorale concert. And she belongs to the chorale, so she at least goes to hear it. And there, 3 rows ahead of her, is William Warfield. And at the end of the concert, he sees her and says, okay.
You've earned round 2, huh?
So that's how she got, and she would work all week and do, I don't know, 2 or 3 tapes and get $50 a week. $50 a week or $50 a month, I don't know. But she was living at home, and one thing led to another.
So, if today was the last day you could talk to your children, it's the last time you're going to tell them anything, what would you most want to say to each of your kids? John, what would you want to say to Pam to start with, if it was the last conversation you're ever going to have with her?
Be assured I love you. That's
It's pretty economical, pretty darn good.
I don't know who this is, but I wish they weren't. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Gerry, how about you? For Pam, what would you want her to know that you feel about her, or what would you want her to hear from you?
I think that she is a totally extraordinary person. Okay. What is this?
Is it a phone? Is it a ring? Is it your Twitter?
What would I tell Pam? I would tell Pam that I think that she is one of the most remarkable people ever. I think that she has taken a tragedy and dealt with it in the most extraordinary way. I think that she is an unbelievable character, that she's been an inspirational teacher, that she's been a totally loving daughter, that she has been a phenomenal mother, and that she has shown unbelievable courage in building a life that she never planned for.
How about Gwen? Gwen, what would you say to Gwen? What would you want to say to Gwen for her to remember for the rest of her life? What would you want to say to Gwen if it was the last conversation you were going to have with her?
Don't smoke.
I think that's pretty safe.
I haven't thought about it. I am not as vocally mature as Gerry is.
So when you think of Gwen, maybe what's something that kind of the essence of Gwen in your mind? You've watched your kids for 60 years in some cases.
Yeah.
So when it comes to Gwen, what is it maybe you're most proud of her, or what about Gwen kind of really gets you?
I would say all of them. The two of them left because they finished Pam.
You did Pam.
Yeah.
So we have 3 left.
They should feel extremely proud of the unlimited, unbound love I feel toward them. You know? That's all I can tell you.
Okay. Gerry, so kind of the essence of Gwen, when you think of what is it about her that just impresses you or strikes you or kind of is the essence?
I think that she has a heart that knows no bounds. There is no one who needs anything that Gwen doesn't sense and try and help.
It's a very interesting comment, because in a conversation I'd had with Marion, she said, Gwen, in a crisis, there's nobody better that you could have.
Absolutely. I mean, Gwen is there, and she's there in every sense. And she'll try anything. Did you know that at one point she sang the Star Spangled Banner at the opening of a baseball game somewhere?
I did not know that.
She did stand-up comedy once. She's unbelievable. I mean, and when you listen to her program, the way she can connect 3 stories and make them a unit is amazing. She has a sense of humor that is unbelievable and off guard. She does always something different. She's very involved with a guy who is a bank robber at, I think, Statesville. And has this correspondence with him because he wrote her this very literate, funny letter once, and she answered back, and they have this close connection now. And she's got a job for him in California when he gets out of prison in 2 years. And who is it with? It's with one of her friends from elementary school. That's Gwen. She met you once, you're her friend forever. I mean, you can't go anywhere without meeting somebody that knows Gwen. And when you've got a name like Macsai, are you related to Gwen Macsai? Are you related to Marion Macsai? Yeah.
Yeah, the name's memorable, but they can never spell it, I'll bet.
Well, my feeling is M-A-X-I. That's fine.
That's close enough.
And then they'll say, how do you spell Gerry? And my feeling is when you got a name like Macsai, you really don't care how they
Spell Gerry any way you like. Okay, so I've got 2 kids left. So tell me about, what is it about Aaron that kind of really strikes your heart, or, kind of feels like the essence of Aaron at his best?
Aaron has an enormous heart. He is the most caring person you can imagine. And now that he is no longer involved with the struggle to make a marriage work with Marilyn, who I think really didn't want it to work, he is infinitely kind, good, enormously creative. I mean, not just his jewelry, which is mind-blowing, but he's built a garden now that is like a paradise. And his pride and joy is that the hummingbirds are back this year. And his open invitation is, come and sit in the garden. He's got an umbrella now so that you can sit in the shade. He and Frances are the happiest people in the world. And he treasures the relationship. But he also, now that he's finally gotten himself out of the mess that was the marriage, he's just a loving, caring person. He worries about the boys, not really, but he does. He's a wonderful mother. When Marilyn always worked, and when the kids would come home from school, Aaron was the one that was at home. And he's just a really good person, and very talented. I came across one of his photographs and I thought, kid's got talent.
there is a real warmth that
There
just
is.
exudes from Erin. So how about
And
Marion?
Marion, nobody could drive Marion harder than she drives herself. But she is such a rarity. She is an ultimate perfectionist in her work. But more than that, she cares about every stupid person that walks into that office. And that's what I hear from people all the time. I saw your daughter, and you know, it was so wonderful because she listened to me. And every person, I mean, you have to really be a bitch to turn her against you. And Marion, I tell her that I think we're going back to Sanibel in February. I've arranged with the same person that we rented from before, because it's a house on one level and it has an attached garage and it comes with a car and blah blah blah.
Yeah, we saw you there.
Yeah. And same house. And her first question is, are you going to have enough help? And you know, Marion's a problem solver. I mean, that's where her head goes. All right, what are all the problems and how can we solve them? And it's thoughtful, unbelievably thoughtful. I mean, I can't find anything that I would criticize, except that she does give advice freely. And I accept it and then often pay no attention to it, but it's easiest that way.
That's elegant. Okay. I think I probably asked, 5% of the questions I had prepared. So before we quit, is there any more you want to say?
Anything more what?
Anything more that you want to say? Anything more that this triggered, that bubbled up in your mind that you want to share?
I'm thirsty.
Yeah, I'm thirsty too. I'm thirsty, and I gotta pee.
Me too.
At this point in my life, I look back and number one, I cannot imagine how we are so lucky. We have, I don't think I could ask for anything that I don't have. I look at the family and it is infinite gratitude that I have that they're close to each other, that they have each other, that the people that they married just walked into the family. I don't know if you want to repeat this or not, but the last time everybody was over, I said to Jack, how's your family? And he said, this is my family. And I didn't burst into tears, but I thought, what a comment. What a sense of, because I know the rest of his family, and there are good people there, but it's not like our family. I mean, you're a member of our family. Nothing should ever happen to you, Steve. but if it did, you know they'd be there. And I don't know what else I could have done that would have been more, I could have earned a Nobel Prize, that's true. But, what the hell?
Still time.
There's still time, right? But I don't know, Oslo is just not my favorite city.
Yeah, no, Oslo, thumbs down for Oslo.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. How did this, what did you think about this conversation? Was this, feel like this was worthwhile, or?
Oh, I thought it was great. I think that it is. I think it's an unbelievable way to spend your time. What have you gotten from it?
I just feel like a voyeur. I feel like I get to come in and peek around at, you know, what a life is made up of. And I've had a chance to do it 3 or 4 times now in a way that's been really cool. Anything in particular that you appreciated about today?
I appreciate anybody that can get Jen to talk about feelings.
I'm not sure I did.
Well, you did better than most. Jan will talk about the Holocaust as a historical event. You know, I read somewhere once that the difference between men and women is that men put all their feelings in a box, close the box, and put it in storage. And then they'll have work, and that's in a box, and they put it in storage. And they can't have more than one box open at the same time.
I've always heard that men don't have a lot of feelings, but I've always felt like if you were ever at a good hockey game, you can see that men feel all the time. They're crying, they're screaming, they're...
Absolutely. Sometimes a Cubs game.
Sometimes a Cubs game too. I will say a couple things. When we were out with Marion and Jack at the lake last weekend, 10 days ago, I was reliving a couple of stories of Lori and I and Marion back in Cousins Hall, and I just think of some of my best times. I can remember going to a reunion that Marion went with to Ann Arbor. Was like one of the first times we'd gone back there together, and I just so appreciate. I mean, she played a prominent role in my being with Lori because they were roommates back in college, and we have been so happy having them back here. I remember when we first came and we saw them when we were visiting and said, "Oh, by the way, we're moving to Chicago," and they said, "We're moving to Iowa." That's not very good. I've just felt like what I've gotten the privilege of being involved with you guys yourselves, and not so much Gwen, because I really don't, but with your other kids, it just feels like I also feel very fortunate. I mean, I really feel lucky. And Marion and Jack, are our dearest friends. So I feel it's a real privilege to get to spend time with you guys. I've really enjoyed working with you for a lot of years. And today is just kind of icing on the cake. So.
Well, you are a part of the family, Steve. It's I worry about you and Lori and the kids.
That proves I'm part of the family.
I know. I know. It's a very inclusive family. It truly is. It seems to be able to expand endlessly, and it keeps it rich. It keeps it growing, and you know, I look around and how in hell could we be so lucky? I mean, with Pam, you know, August still leaves a hole in our lives, but Julian and Joel, it's just, you know, yeah.
I'm Swiss. I'm Swiss.
That's right.
I can just picture Agas telling me that 10 times.
Right.
What do you want? I'm Swiss.
Yeah.
It's like that explains everything in the world.
That's right. And you know, and all of them are just amazing. And Jack, I think Jack's grown to be truly a member of the family, and I mean,
I know he knows. I know he sees himself as such an included, welcomed, you know, integral part of the family.
yeah, and Jack, once in a while, will even open up a feeling. But they've been, you know, every family goes through shit. There's no question about it. You just can't avoid it. But you handle it, he handled it, Marion handled it. And, you know, and I look at Paul and I think, holy cow, what kind of job is that? When I saw him, when he was here for John's birthday, and I said, well, how was the week? And he said, well, it could have been worse. And I thought, well, that's true. It could have been a lot worse. I'm sure it was kind of shitty, but it could have been worse, you know. Could have had a scandal or something. But holy cow, I've got a son who's a son-in-law who's a superintendent of schools.
Wow.
And Jack, you know, who is really making a difference with United Way. I mean, I know some of the groups in Evanston that they support, and whatever. And we got you.
It's good company to be part of. Okay, I'm gonna wrap up and we can get a drink and go to the bathroom.
I was gonna say, can I give you a bathroom and a drink?
I've actually got a bottle of water sitting in the car, but
Yeah,
I
but
will
it's
use your
gonna-
bathroom.
But it is gonna be warm in the car.
I don't care. Warm's fine with me. Wow. The dictaphone didn't quit. Oh boy.